Hi everybody, my name is Noah and welcome to this Stet Studio video. Today we're going to be talking about my experiences using a pen name or nom de plume or pseudonym. I'll be using all three interchangeably as an artist and a writer. I'm first going to share my experience with both using and then not using pen names. Then, while we talk, I'm going to be painting pictures of two women in honor of Women's History Month, which you'll be able to view on Instagram and will be available for purchase in my shop. I'm also hoping to do prints of this series. A portion of the proceeds of the initial sale will be going to support LGBT individuals in Ukraine. Now, on to our main subject. Fake names. We're going to start with why I chose to use pen names for more than 10 years. There were several different reasons. My first introduction to creating things on the internet for other people was a WordPress blog that I started when I was maybe 14. I grew up in the stranger danger era of the internet when parents feared the internet, back before they started believing everything they read on Facebook. So, by extension, I was also a little scared of the internet. And my mom also wanted me to keep my identity safe since I was still a child. I have also always been a rather private person in general, so even when I turned 18 and became an adult, I avoided using my full real name on the internet. However, when I started taking my writing more seriously and submitting my work for publishing, I knew I would need a proper name that I used across the internet. I remember Snapchatting my girlfriend trying to decide on a new last name. I had decided I would keep using my actual first name at the time. I decided I didn't want to use my actual last name for all of the reasons that I've already mentioned, but I also had a bit of trauma surrounding my last name, and without getting into it, because that would be an entirely different video, I just didn't want to give my last name and those associated with it the honor of being associated with my writing. In the end, I chose the last name Devlin. I wanted to pick a last name that I thought would be accurate in terms of my culture, as well as sounding well with my first name, which at the time was Sarah. It would be dishonest in my mind to choose a name of a culture that I am not descended from, especially from a culture that is marginalized. Devlin is an English last name, which I am in part also. I also made sure to give my new nom de plume a good Google to make sure that there wasn't anyone that I couldn't stand to be confused with. The name lasted me for several years, as did my brand at the time, which was Sarah Writes Etc. Then, in late 2019 or so, I started to realize that my birth name didn't work for me anymore. I had since realized that I was non-binary, and I was changing how I presented myself to the world in order to be in line with my identity. I decided at the time to also completely change my brand name as I started to publicly go by Noah, which took me a while to do, because again, I'm a really private person. I could have just switched to Noah Writes Etc., of course, but I didn't like the sound of it, and I also decided that I wanted a brand name that didn't have my name in it. I was worried that I might end up switching my name back or choosing something else entirely later on down the road, and I didn't want to have to make another change to my brand, and thus Stet Studio was born. Anyway, stepping off that runaway train of thought, back to pen names. I decided that I didn't like the sound of Noah Devlin, so I went through the same process as before of making lists of names. The last name I ended up choosing was Greer, which sounded very similar to my real last name, Griggs. I went through the same steps as before, looking within my culture, making sure both first and last names sounded good together, and that I wouldn't be associated with anyone horrid. Noah Greer worked. Then, in the end of last year, I started to feel more and more like I wanted to go by my real name. And at the end of January, I finally announced to the world via an Instagram post that I was now going by Noah Griggs. Why did I make the change? Well, there are a few reasons. But mainly, I'm now more comfortable as who I am. I've gone through a lot of self-growth in the past year, and I am less scared to be myself on the internet. I've also done a lot of work to heal my connection to my last name, and I feel okay in claiming it for myself, as it is mine. So hearing all of that might have helped you decide whether you want to use a pseudonym, but probably not. I just thought it would be helpful for you to hear my own experience. So now we're going to talk about a list of things that you could consider if you're trying to decide whether to have a pseudonym or not. 1. Do you want some privacy? From whom? Your family or relatives? Your field of work? For me, it was a bit of both. I was an education major at the time, and I was scared that writing and putting myself out there on the internet would be considered inappropriate for an elementary teacher. In the United States, there is a big push, at least in the area that I lived in at the time, that elementary teachers should be great role models for their students, and it is almost assumed that they're not allowed to have a personal life, which isn't true at all or a good thing. But that was how I perceived it, and that was what I had heard from my professors. This can also be affected by what you're creating. If you're creating something that's very gory and not appropriate for children, or even something like LGBT plus content like me, which shouldn't be an issue, but of course, especially now, it is considered perhaps an issue. Number 2, is it safe for you to use your real name? This is especially true if you're a minor or LGBT plus or any other marginalized group, and you're speaking out on controversial topics. Thankfully, I am relatively safe now as someone who lives in the United States and does not rely on family members or relatives for any sort of financial support. What will you do / how will you feel if after putting your creations out into the world, i.e. publishing a book or signing a painting that is sold, you decide that you want to change your name? Will it be a big deal to you that previous works will be out there under a different name? And number 4, would having a nom de plume help you in your industry? Sometimes that is the case. For example, some women who publish science fiction or fantasy books will masculinize their names to encourage male readers and industry peers to take them more seriously. And some authors will Americanize their names so it is more palatable to white readers. Neither of these things is really wrong, although the fact that some people feel that they need to isn't a good thing. Society should definitely be more accepting of people and their identities. But it also isn't a necessary thing either, no matter what genre you may be writing or creating in. Number 5, how secretive are you going to be about your pen name? Will anyone know you by your real name and your pen name? What happens if those worlds collide? It's happened to me more than once. I was very, very secretive in the beginning, and it sort of created issues in that vein. So think about that. So if you're thinking now that, yeah, maybe I do want a pen name, and you're thinking about what it might be, here are some steps you can take to try and find the right one for you. Make a list of first and last names as well as combinations of these names that you think sound nice. Overall, you want it to be something that you like. Practice calling yourself by that name and having someone you trust in your life call you by it as well, so you can see if you can get used to it, if it feels right, because it is going to be, in a sense, part of your identity, even if it isn't your real name. If it makes you shudder, change it. Remember, it'll take you some getting used to this new name, even if it does end up being the one. So don't be afraid to try out several different names over a longer time span before starting to publicly use one. I would also recommend, as I've mentioned before, at this step, to research the origin of your selected names, or perhaps look up names of a certain origin and then choose from that list. It isn't really a huge deal, especially if you don't know your heritage or it really doesn't matter to you, but it is a good way to present yourself authentically, especially if you're a white person. Give your short list of names that you like being called a thorough Google. You might even want to do this before you start getting attached to them, if it is going to sway your decision. Make sure that there is no one else famous with that name, which can help with your branding and your promotion, depending on where you go with your work. Or if there is someone out there already, that's not the end of the world, but make sure that you wouldn't mind being associated with that person or having people think you may have named yourself after them, even if you didn't. I'm looking at you, J.K. Rowling. Robert Galbraith, come on. If any of your names don't pass any of these steps, go back to the beginning, maybe reshuffle things, and try again. You'll find something in the end. That's my pen name saga, from using a pen name to not. It's a journey that spanned more than 12 years and a lot of growth and change along the way. So don't be worried if you can't figure out what you want to do right away and what name you want to use, or whether you want to use a pen name at all. I've changed the name I use when creating several times now, probably 4 or 5 throughout my whole life, and definitely 3 times in my current creative journey. And the world hasn't exploded, and I'm still making art and writing and just doing my thing. It's not the end of the world if you do the same thing. Be sure to keep the questions that I've suggested in mind as you go forward. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today and listening to me talk about my experiences with pen names. I hope these questions that I have posed have helped you start to figure out what path you want to take, whatever path that might be. Let me know if you have any thoughts or questions down in the comments below, and be sure to like, subscribe, ring that bell, and all that silliness if you'd like to hang out here and watch some more of my videos. You can also find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter as Stet Studio, as well as on my website, stetstudio.com. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye!